Digitel is one of the leading companies for live streaming events, running corporate virtual events, or managed webinars. If you're looking to reach worldwide markets or generate revenue from adding a virtual component to your meetings and conferences, leverage Digitel's 33 years of experience in creating flawless online events. For more information, go to digitellinc.com or email them at contactus@digitel.com.
Are you a follower? Okay, so we're gonna probably add.
Welcome to GatherGeeks, a podcast by BizBash, the place where people passionate about meetings and events come together. Here are your hosts, BizBash CEO David Adler and Editor-in-Chief Beth Kormanik.
Welcome to GatherGeeks. Today we're speaking with Andrea Michaels, President of Extraordinary Events in Los Angeles. The company produces events globally, and its work stretches from corporate incentive trips to product lunches to galas to familiar events like the James Beard Awards. She's well known and much honored in our industry. Among her achievements are the MPI Global Paragon Award, Site Crystal Award, and Pillar of the Industry Award from the special event. She's also an author of books including Reflections on a Successful Wallflower, Lessons in Business, Lessons in Life. Welcome, Andrea, to GatherGeeks.
Thank you very much. Glad to be part of it.
Yeah, well, I was hoping that we could start off by having you tell us about one of your recent events so that listeners can get a sense of what your company does.
Absolutely. Very recently, we just produced an event for Cemex, which is the largest cement company in the world. They've been a client now for over 20 years, and it took place at the New York Stock Exchange for their investors and bankers. So it was a retrospective of the company, of what they have done and what they will be doing in the future with a live webcast. The New York Stock Exchange is obviously not the easiest place in the world to work, but grandiose and wonderful and unusual, so it has a great cachet. Now Cemex is a member of the stock exchange, which allowed us to do a lot of things there which could not otherwise be done, including the executives and the bankers and the investors ringing the final bell. So if people have not ever been on the floor of the stock exchange and they think the way it's represented on movies and TV is maybe fabricated, all it was missing was Leonardo DiCaprio. It's real.
Oh yeah, no. I've done some events on that stock exchange, and it is a fantastic experience for everybody. So Andrea, one of the things you mentioned that this is a long-term client. Maybe you can sort of go through how their thinking has changed about events over the years that you worked with them. I would assume it's a lot different, correct?
Absolutely. It is no longer as filled with frills as it once was. Many, many years ago, they did executive conferences which were all about entertaining their guests, their executives, with headline entertainment, a lot of decor. Nothing had real meaning. They did some business meetings during their executive conferences, but they were almost a byproduct of the overall experience. Now it is focused on business, and it is the message that is getting across, the strategy that is important, and not so much about how pretty is it and how entertaining it is.
So how do you change?
A lot of companies are going there.
How do you make it so that it's aesthetically pleasing, but still get the messaging across? I mean, what should an event planner have as the number one rule? What is the number one Andrea rule on this?
Look at all the details and very clearly understand the strategy of the company and become a part of it to fulfill it. I call that becoming a team member with a company as opposed to, we're not their partners. A lot of people refer to themselves as partners of their client. We're not partners. As long as they're holding the paycheck, we're not their partner. We are there as a member of their team, and I think that's an important part of the thinking, so that if you're a member of the team, then you look at everything everybody is doing, you fit into it, and you deliver what they need as opposed to what you want them to have. And it is all about detail. So I think right now, today, it's about how you get their messaging across. Now, can that be with beautiful table displays or how you set up a business meeting so that everybody is included in it? Yes, I think the same amount of detail is paid to how comfortable is the furniture that they're sitting in, how nice does it look when they walk into a room, but it may not be so much about what centerpiece is on the table.
So when you go and you become a team member, what should an event organizer, how do they research that? How do they spend the time to understand that client, especially when they're not being told by the client a lot? Like, what's your secret sauce?
I think a lot of it is being a sleuth. When you have a long-time client, you grow a long time with them. And so it isn't a discovery process, but for instance, with CEMEX, I go to meetings that I'm not a part of, and I listen very carefully to what the executives are saying. And in the case of many clients who might have a small board meeting where they don't need us, but I would go to the board meeting if I could and listen to what is the message that is being driven. Talk to the executives, talk to the people who aren't necessarily the meeting planner or the event planner, but might be the CFO, for instance, and understand that. I think those are all really important clues when you're looking to build a relationship with a client, is understanding their business, reading very carefully what is out in the press. And, of course, the Internet is great, though not always 100% factual, but it is great in understanding who your client is, becoming familiar on LinkedIn with the people who work for them and seeing what are they saying about their company. It's a lot more intensive research than it used to be.
When you sit down with your client to talk about the next big event, do they know what they want?
They only know usually approximately when they want it, and that's about it. And they might be able to define who their guest list might be in round numbers. Oh, we think it'll be 300, but it might grow to 500. Well, actually, it could be bigger. So, no.
So where do you take that conversation? How does that work? That's you're basically starting from scratch.
Almost always.
And where do you take it? You're basically, they don't realize that you're guiding them.
We have such a long list of questions that we ask that it probably is very annoying. But there's always that budget question, and I think you hear this probably from every single person you ever talk to. Nobody ever wants to give up the budget, and if they do, it's very rarely realistic. And I always just take the approach of throwing out the largest number that I can think of and going, great, you have no budget, we've got $5 million, there's just no end to what we can do. Does that work for you? The answer is always no.
Oh, and is that standard? Is that your standard question? Is that your standard approach to at least
Absolutely.
Adding humor? It's a kind of a humor, or is it serious?
No, it's very serious, because when people say they don't want to stifle your creativity by giving you a budget figure, as far as I'm concerned, that's like saying I want the world on a platter, and that's not what they mean. Right. So we try to get as much information as we can in the way of, okay, you're not 100% sure what your guest list is going to be, but the venue and what you do at that venue is going to be determined by what you think it's going to be. So if we shoot for example, 300 to 500 as the number, would that work for you? Great. And knowing that you really can't give me a budget at this point, if we talk about $300,000, is that a figure that you can live with? And those at least say, and then I follow it up in writing with my understanding is this. Would you please approve that we move forward based on that information? Then you're not just sending out information that is meaningless.
That's interesting. And a little surprising that they're not willing to commit to something.
What other industry is so vague in the specs? I would say that our industry, because people don't have a sense of what it costs, and they don't have a sense right. of what they can really do. So it is dependent upon the planner to actually sort of guide them in bigger ways, right?
Yeah, and the question could be, what did you spend last year. And if they tell you, the question is, was that too much or not enough? Which is a question I find nobody ever asks.
Is that another Andrea rule?
Yeah.
Okay, good. We're going to have the commandments, the 25 commandments.
So speaking of budgets, what trends are you seeing with the events that you're doing in terms of where they're headed? Do clients seem to have more money to work with, or are they are things getting more constricted now?
I think they have more money to work with, but it's not being spent on the same things, or at least in my world. It is being spent on technology, the size and pixelation of the screens. And we joke about it because I do a seminar on this where I bring in technology people, and we have all agreed that the problem is people will spend money on, I want the largest screen, I want the newest screen, I want the curved screen, I want the biggest LED you can find, and they don't give a thought to content. Or want to spend the money on content. And the reality is, if all they want to do is throw their logo on the biggest screen, they're spending their money not very wisely. So our job has been a lot to educate them on the value of well thought out and good content. When you see that they do a lot of it in-house to save money, and then you show up and you have got white print on a light blue background, or you've got 300 people in a room for a meeting, and the font is so small that past the third row you can't read it, or you've got all these fancy graphs and charts, but the typeface is tiny, that's where I feel that people need the education right now. In other words, go to an AV house and put up your presentation on exactly the size screen you intend to use, and then go to the back of the room and tell me what you can read.
That's a great tip.
And so how much time are you spending protecting them from bad presentations? Or is it something that you have to sort of let go?
I don't ever let it go, but they don't always follow it until it hasn't worked.
Any horror stories about that you can share?
I don't think we should let go of those.
I
don't
agree.
think we should let go of those things.
Totally.
So who's your ally in that situation? Is it the in-house person who's planning the conference, or is it the presenter themselves? Like, where do you take that concern, and how does that coaching go?
We are very fortunate that, especially if we've had a long-standing relationship, or even maybe not long-standing, but multiple-year relationship with someone, and we are able to do an intensive debrief, then the questions would be, tell me your impressions of how it went, what you saw, what you think could be improved, how we could help you improve it. And almost always, because I work with a lot of European and Latin American clientele, so I phrase things differently than I probably would working with someone in New York City, which is a whole lot more direct. And the question is always, would you be willing to share with me your thoughts on this meeting and what else we might have done differently or could have added to improve it? Not ever focusing on what was wrong. And phrased with, what would you think of, with an example, share with me your opinion about that. We're very cautious.
So that's another sort of commandment I see, is to sort of watch your language carefully and how you look for feedback. Because feedback is important, but you don't want to make sure you're setting the wrong tone.
Absolutely. I think that language is something that is a skill set that many young people, particularly when you talk about working with millennials, it takes time to learn that kind of communication. It's not easy because you're not talking to your parents or your friends. You're talking to people who hold the checkbook.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Going back to budgets, you said tech and AV are getting more of the spend these days. Decor is perhaps shrinking. Any other trends that you've seen in terms of where where money is being spent or what they're looking for?
I think money is being, and I could be wrong because I'm really only talking about my market share. And, when I read your magazine online or the publications, and I go, wow, a lot of people are really spending a lot of money on things people aren't spending with me. I'm so jealous. I think, like it's the world of lounge furnitures and DJs, right? Mm-hmm. That's not, I don't see that ending. Someone asked me if I could predict a trend of the future a while ago, just in a casual conversation, and I thought, I hope it is not circ acts jumping off of lounge furnitures with DJ music playing, because I miss the creativity of old, where it was far more interactive, but right now it really is all about what you can photograph. So if you can't take a picture of it from your phone, it has no value.
Wouldn't that say that decor spending would be more important then?
No, I see the activation more important than the decor.
Is activation and decor one in the same in many cases?
I don't think so.
What is your reason?
I think that decor to me is a lot about one overall look, an impression when you walk into a room and you look at the decor, it is one cohesive picture. When you talk about activations, you might be talking about a festival environment where the important thing is to go to the perimeter of the room where some kind of a photo opportunity has been created, or whether there's a virtual reality experience you're being tied into. That might not be a decor piece as much as it might be a creative bit of signage, almost like a very creative trade show booth, but something that draws you to a specific space.
Interesting. I've not thought of it about that way. Sometimes I think about the entire decor as an activation. If it's a set.
And it can be.
Yes.
It can be. And I think in social, it is probably a lot more about that. In corporate, it might be another way of getting people to network by moving around from place to place, with each place being somewhat different. Then you mix it with food stations where your foods are different, and people have something to talk about. That's networking.
But are you trying to, I'm a big believer in the concept of social physics, how ideas flow. And it sounds like you are thinking in a similar vein in terms of the idea of when you bring people together, you're either educating them, connecting them, or wowing them. I mean, what is your philosophy of bringing people? What's the purpose of bringing people together?
To exchange ideas, to exchange thoughts, to get to know each other and form relationships which will be ongoing. That's the idea to me of getting people together, not, 140 character communications, but rather I love the idea of face-to-face asking questions, getting answers, finding out what commonality is. And honestly, business, that to me is where you get referrals from and how you continue to grow. Oh, I met someone the other day and, they introduced me to someone who I never would have even thought of meeting in any other way, but because we had a conversation, we moved on.
Right.
How are you observing that or determining if your design for a meeting or a conference event is successful? What do you look for?
Well, one of the things that I can look at is just how many social media hits it got, because, that's a way of measurement nowadays. I don't look at ROI, funny enough, because that to me personally is meaningless. First of all, you can't always measure it in short term, and nobody wants to look at it in long term. You can watch it when you walk into a room. If a room is dead quiet and people are standing around, at a high boy alone, you're not doing what you need to be doing. And when you see a buzz where people who don't know each other are smiling, laughing, talking to each other, I think it's something you can measure as soon as you walk into the room.
Interesting. And have you, since Extraordinary Events does a variety of event types, meetings, and everything I mentioned before. Are you borrowing elements from different types of events that maybe you didn't in the past? So your meeting takes something from, your product launch or, something like that.
Absolutely, and I can give you a concrete example. We worked a lot with grand openings, which we made into festival-style experiences, and then we had a corporate client with a very large group. I think it was 5,000, and we turned it into a festival experience where it would be the same thing as if they had gone to a Coachella. It was the same look, the same feel, the same kind of entertainment. And it worked magically, but I wouldn't have known how to do it had we not done it festival style previously.
Mm-hmm. Oh, you believe? I think we're on the same page that our industry is morphing together, like a B2B event and a B2C event and a social event and a personal event everyone's trying to achieve the same thing, that feeling, right? The Maya Angelou feeling. And
well, it's the emotional connection to what's going on. If you can't feel anything, I don't deem it a success. Now, admittedly, not everybody will. But I think that's an important thing to look at is how do you want people to feel about this event?
So what do you do? What do you do when you go into that room and you see these people not talking, standing at the high boys, and you're in charge of that event? Do you want to have a heart attack right there, or can you do anything? Like, what's the first thing that you do? Do you turn the music up?
I do. Well, no, I wouldn't necessarily turn it up, but I would take a look and see why aren't people moving around and why are they not connecting to each other. And the first thing I would do is probably go to the client themselves and find a way that maybe it's the VIPs start moving around and making connections with the people that are there. Maybe it is the staff of the company itself that starts introducing people to each other or asking them if they'd had an opportunity to taste something that was on the other side of the room, then bringing a few people together, getting them to move together. Maybe it is the DJ. And I think we're always very careful in our selection of DJs because it's not always about a club style. And I think it's more often about someone, if they can handle a bar mitzvah, they can handle a corporate crowd. They don't need to start out doing it the same way, but they need to be able to read the crowd and deliver what will bring them together.
So you're going to be real-time planning if you see that situation. That seems like you have the ability to do that.
Absolutely.
Which most people don't.
Absolutely.
Or do you think that they should?
A long, long time ago, well, we won't talk about how many years.
No, let's not.
You would go to parties, because then they were parties, they weren't events, and sometimes all it took to get people on the dance floor was the band leader to say, "We invite you to dance." People need to be invited to do something and not just stand around. So I take a look and I say, how do we invite them in subtle ways to participate?
So you know what? This is another commandment. You're saying to people, if you're an event organizer, your job does not end when it starts. Your job is all the way through every minute.
Absolutely. I mean, I have clients go, "You're staying through the whole event?" You bet I am. You bet I am. Of course I am. But I also, and you've probably read this in almost any interview I've ever done, David, I look at an event as a piece of theater. There's an overture, which is what people experience when they walk in. There are several acts, and they go to a finale. But you have to keep changing up the event so it is not always static, whether it's new food, whether it's a special effect that happens at a certain time, whether you reveal something. If people have left too early, you want them to know they've missed something.
Do you have a timetable for that? Is it one reveal or surprise or new food every 15 minutes, every half an hour?
Sure. It is pre-planned in how I think it should work, but it is always flexibly managed on site because sometimes you need the food out earlier. Sometimes you meet it held until later, and I'm not talking about plated dinners. But you can plan a reveal to happen at 10:15 and then realize the traffic was bad and people couldn't get there on time. So do you want to reveal something when no one's in the room, or do you want to hold it until 11 o'clock? I think that flexibility is really the most important part of the event planning process.
So who at that, like at an event, who is that command control person? If you're not there, for example, like who is that? What is the commandment? What is one of your commandments about who's in charge?
There's always a hierarchy. There's a senior producer who is responsible for the event. When I'm there, that person would also be listening to me, and we would work in tandem. But when I'm not, this is a very experienced person who can do the same thing I could do, and working in tandem with a technical director who I've worked with for years and years and years. They really understand the same logistics and the same emotional content of an event. So, yeah. And hopefully they will work hand in hand with the meeting planner of the company so that the decisions are mutual.
Let's step it up one notch then. And this is my sort of rant, and I believe that CEOs and people like that many of them are terrible hosts, and they don't know how to be part of this, and I want to beat up on them. So like when I was working at the State Department, helping out there, you could tell the great people that were heads of state and the ones that were not, because the ones that were great went to every single table and went to people and said hello at these small dinners. And CEOs are forgetting that they're the host. I want to like slap them in the head and get them to sort of like, they're as much a part of the event as the event organizers and the corporate people. Do you have a reaction to that comment?
I agree 100%.
Okay.
And normally, I mean, I think one of the resistances, I think, is that though you've got people who are in powerful positions, they're social introverts.
Yeah. It's hard to believe sometimes that these people get to these high levels and can't work a room.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of ways to kind of work with that. We've actually, I mean, with Passover here, the seat for Elijah, but you can leave an empty seat at each place, at each table, so that an executive can move around and sit for just a few minutes.
Oh my God, we got another commandment. This is a really good idea that I have not really thought about that.
Well, you make it inviting for them.
That's great.
Just enough time to stop by, say hello, have a little chit-chat, and then move on to another table.
Okay,
But every table.
That's great. Yeah, no, I think that's a really good idea. And I would say that that's one tip that people should start doing right away.
You mentioned VIPs earlier, and this is another example of how you are encouraging them to work the room and make sure that the energy is good at your events. But are there other things that you think about with VIPs or ways that you handle those groups, whether it's this kind of a networking thing or something having to do with the design of a room or other things like that?
Two things come to mind, actually. One of them is that they are the greeting committee. So if you can imagine that when people enter, let's say, a dinner party, the president and the vice president of the company are there personally to shake their hand and say, welcome, I'm glad you're here. Well, even if they are introverted, they can get that much out. Or they can read a name tag, Joe, how long have you been with the company? Really glad to meet you. Ever been to Indianapolis before? Welcome, it's a surprising city. I mean, they can be fed lines. It's just a matter of humanity. The other thing is if you ever get them on stage during the business part of it, have your MC or your host actually ask them a question that is about them and who they are. Something about where did you go to school? What is your happiest memory of high school? Whatever it is that humanizes them. And then they become approachable. And so that's really important, that no one should be afraid to go up to an executive just because they're an executive.
Yep. No, I always use this line that David Beam, who's one of the designers here, said that when he first started his career, he worked for Mary Kay. And he said that what he learned from Mary Kay is that everyone has a sign on their forehead saying, I am important. And how do you sort of do that as part of event strategy as well? I think is very a key learning.
I agree. It is a matter of yes, someone runs a company, but in that meeting space or dinner space, they're consuming the same food, they're using the same forks and knives, they're all kind of equal. And I think that makes that playing field even. So it's a different opportunity to connect. Some of the CEOs that we've worked with, they're on stage at the meeting and then they disappear.
Right. I hate that, by the way.
Yeah. So we need to look at the reasons of why they disappear and what can we do to encourage them to actually be there.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And that could take on a lot of different tones.
Like what? What do you mean?
We had one CEO that would plan a team building activity or a joint community experience and would promise to be at the event, but would always skip out.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and after a couple years of this and talking to his staff, he really was extremely shy with people he did not know. So we found that the way to get him to do it was not to have him do it alone. But once we did an event, let's say on an island, this is just an example, but instead of him arriving on his private boat, his executives and the meeting planner, so he was surrounded by 4 or 5 people, as well as his security team. He did not arrive to this alone. And that was actually the key to getting him to participate.
Yeah, so like dig a little bit and figure out the why as opposed to just criticize. That's very
and that
personal.
why on every single element is so important. Why is this being done?
Yep.
Why doesn't this happen? How do we fix it?
Yeah, that's fascinating.
I see that's another commandment. We're going to cut to many commandments from.
Are we up to 25 yet?
I don't know yet, but we're working. We're not going to add them up.
So let's switch gears to a different type of event, the big spectacle. You have pulled off these types of events. One that we covered in BizBash, I remember, was the grand opening of the Summerlin development near Las Vegas. And this had to be an effects-heavy, entertainment-heavy to-do, worthy of Las Vegas. So where do you start with events like that?
If I can tell you the story of that event, you would be kind of surprised because it started out with a woman who I had worked with in the past for another grand opening, calling and talking to me about this and saying, we're looking for some minor entertainment throughout the opening weekend. Okay. We suggested a few things that could be done, which were activations, things for kids, few things for adults, without having any idea what the property looked like. And we went up there and we met with the creative director of the team, and we just talking about possibilities. The task that was given to us was, first of all, they wanted to do a morning grand opening in order to get the press. Mm-hmm. And we said, everybody does this, but the reality is if you do it in the evening, look at the attendance you can get, the sound, the lights, the special effects, the everything to make it a grand opening. Well, if we could get 5,000 people there on the opening night, the CEO would be so happy. And we said, well, what if we can get 25,000 people there on the opening night? That'll never happen. We got 25,000 people there on the opening night, and through the activations, through the programming, we got 250,000 people there for the entire weekend. We ran out of everything. The stores sold out. We had those light-up wristbands for the opening night. We ordered 10,000 thinking, okay, we'll get more than 5. 15,000 people didn't have them. Everything just mushroomed into this spectacle. And we talk about it because one of the things that we learned was if everybody we hire has huge social media followings, then they are influencers in their own way. So when we hired the food trucks, because the restaurants weren't open, how many followers do you have? A lot of the decision on which food trucks, which entertainers to hire was based upon their social media followings, and their contracts called for them to publicize and post for a month prior, leading up to and day of.
And so is that what you attribute that massive spike? What is that, 5 times over what the highest hope had been? It's social media reach?
Oh, I absolutely think that had a lot to do with it. The DJ we hired for the opening night had 100,000 followers, and part of his contract was you need to blast it out and in real time, So we found the community coming. People were coming with their kids, with their families. I mean, it was massive. There was no parking left.
That's incredible.
Yeah, but we looked at it in a different way. We looked at it with the objective of, how do we get as many bodies as possible here? Well, in today's world, how do you do that?
So,
It's not by putting an ad in the paper.
Yeah, that's an interesting lesson for vendors, too, because I don't see many marketing themselves that way necessarily.
Well, most of the time they're told not to post. Oh, no, you're supposed to, we don't hide our vendors. It's like, you're part of this team. You're recognized. You wear your own shirts with your own logos. That's fine. I want to be able to find you and not wonder who you are. Oh my God, is that part of the entertainment? Is he a decorator? Is he the rental company? He's wearing one of my shirts. Who is he? I don't want that. I want to be able to know who they are. They should be recognized.
It takes a village. The thing is, though, you said you ran out of everything. Now, in the old days, event organizers were terrified of running out of everything. It didn't really matter, right?
It's a badge of honor nowadays.
It's a badge. And is that a difference that you see? That if there's a long line, it's like a good thing as opposed to a bad thing?
Well, look, if the stores have to restock.
Yeah, for stores, it's great.
It's great for stores. Then they start handing out vouchers.
Yeah.
The food trucks, first day, first night, ran out earlier. It gave them what they needed to do over the next 3. So, yeah, it is kind of a good thing. It's sort of like do you really want to end the band when there's only one couple on the dance floor? Or do you want to end the band when the dance floor is full, wanting more? I go for when the dance floor is full, wanting more.
And is that part
not till it dies its own death?
Is that so? Do you, as crowd shaping, I call it, are you doing that? Are you sort of saying, okay, we're going to end this right now? It's 1:00 or whatever.
Yes.
You're actually at the tiller. You're running. You're dealing with the ship, and you're making those decisions.
I am, because otherwise, a band, for instance, or a DJ will be sucked into, oh no, just one more. And then suddenly people start filtering out, and it's empty and it's lifeless. And you don't ever want it to end on a lifeless moment.
So another commandment I'm hearing is be deliberate in every decision you make.
Yes.
And so that would be an Andrea commandment. Can I ask? Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was going to say, because if you think about, if I do this, what will happen? If I do that, what will happen? And you make an informed, or an experienced decision about your choice. So yes, deliberate is important after you think about why you're doing it.
So as we start wrapping up, we'll probably come up with other questions. I read something that you wrote about what is success. And it was an articulate way of sort of understanding the difference between goals and achievement and things like that. Do you want to comment a little about that? I found that very interesting.
I'm glad you asked me that question, because I don't believe that there is such a thing as success. And here's the reason why. Let's just say in your mind you have achieved success when you've earned $1 million. So you earn $1 million. Does that mean you stop because you've achieved what you have termed success? I think success is an ongoing term, which means you keep moving forward, you keep achieving, and success in itself is not a goal. Success is a way of life. Goals are interim steps which can be achieved until you set another goal. but I think success or the term of it can work against you.
Yeah, that's provocative. Do you go through deliberate goal setting sessions with your team?
No. Maybe I should, but no, I don't. I think if people are productive and they're doing their jobs and they're happy with what they're doing, then their goal is to be happy with what they're doing and they achieve what they need to. What happens when you set a goal sometimes and you don't achieve it due to any kind of circumstance out of your control, you feel like you failed. And I don't believe that anybody should ever feel a sense of failure.
Mm-hmm. You know, one of the things you talk about success and goals and all of that, but one of the other articles that I read said that one of the biggest problems that we have in our industry is that people are afraid to ask for the business. Can you go through your theory on that and why you have been able to do that so well over your career?
What is the very worst thing that could happen when you ask for anything is that you're told no. And no to me is another opportunity to say, why not? And to get answers of, I didn't win this piece of business. Please share with me what I could have done. What else could I have done to earn this piece of business? Or I would like one more stab at it because obviously, do you like my company? Do you like what we've been doing? Or is it this specific idea that didn't move you? Then let us work together to come up with an idea that you do like. We want to work with you. And I don't think I have ever closed a meeting without saying, we would like to work with you. What is the next step to make that happen?
Is this a commandment, an Andrea commandment?
It is. It absolutely is. Why on earth would you ever want to leave a meeting going, thank you, it was very nice to have met you, open the door and close it behind you? Why would you do that?
But what's the fear? What's the fear of the average person that they're not doing that? Is it just they're afraid to be rejected? Or they just, what's the motivation behind not doing it?
One is I think they're afraid to hear no or be put off by something. And it also, to a lot of people, sounds like it would be too aggressive, but I don't think it necessarily has to be. I think it's, again, in the way you ask. What is wrong with saying, I like your company. I want to know more about it. I want to work with you. How do we do that?
Right. That's the difference between being direct and being aggressive.
Yeah. What are the next steps here? I think that is really important to always ask.
Mm-hmm. One of the last lines, which I'm a total believer in, is your business mantra, business and personal mantra. What is your business and personal mantra? Okay, I'll give you a hint. Say what you mean and mean what you say.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. It is. I mean, my personal mantra, and I'm learning it more every day, be honest. Just be honest about everything.
Well, I believe that transparency is the new authenticity.
It is if it's sincere.
Yes,
I think
sincere.
Transparency is a much misused word right now.
Okay, tell us.
Do you agree?
Yes. When I say it, I believe that you're right. It has a huge dose of sincerity to it. Otherwise, it's inauthentic. So I'm contradicting myself.
Yeah, I agree with you, David. I think that it is very if you claim to be transparent, you better be
well,
transparent.
It goes back to say what you mean, not say what you mean and mean what you say.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
Well, this was really interesting, Andrea. I really appreciate you joining us and talking to us about your philosophy, sharing some examples from past events, and informing our listeners about all of these topics we covered. And before we go, please let our listeners know how they can reach you.
I can be reached by email atamichaels@extraordinaryevents.com, through our website, which is www.extraordinaryevents.com, or everybody can have my cell phone number and call me at any time, 818-512-16 603. I am available to anybody anytime they have a question or just want to chat.
One of the great things I love about our industry is everyone's willingness to help the next generation and our regular generations of the people that we work with every day, because we're learning every single day. And I believe that this conversation today was a bit of a masterclass in things that you may not just read in textbooks. And so I thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity. The questions were wonderful. The conversation was provocative, and you inspired me. So thank you.
Absolutely. And before we sign off, Andrea, you are no stranger to winning awards. And so I wanted to let all of our listeners know that BizBash has just announced our 2018 Event Style Awards. So it's time for everyone to enter their best work from the past year. And we're looking for creative, innovative, and brilliantly executed work from the meeting and event industry. And this year, we even have some new categories in like best influencer event, best team building activity, and best fair and festival. So overall, we have more than 30 categories. And for more information on how to enter, go to bizbash.com/awards.
Great. So we're wrapping up.
Well, you have certainly elevated the industry, so thank you.
So much.
Thank
So
you.
we're wrapping up this another edition of Gather Geeks. Oh, I guess until next time, it's Gather On.
Gather on.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or your favorite podcast app. We can be found on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Player FM, Google Play, and Pocket Cast. Be sure to leave us a rating and review. It helps others discover the Gather Geeks podcast. We'd also love to hear from you. You can leave feedback on Twitter at GatherGeeks or leave us an email, gathergeeks@bizbash.com. We hope you'll join us again for the next episode of Gather Geeks. Until then, gather on. If you are looking for a state-of-the-art learning management system, take a look at Digitel's newest platform, Opus DX. Opus DX offers the robust platform for event organizers and associations to manage content. To learn more and schedule a demo, email them at contactus@digitelinc.com. That's contact us at digitellinc.com. This episode is also sponsored by Event Leadership Institute. Invest in yourself and your staff with self-paced online event education designed to fit into your busy schedule. Subscribe to the Event Leadership Institute for only $25 per month and gain access to an extensive on-demand video library of classes, as well as interviews with industry leaders. Best of all, you can watch classes in small pieces or all at once. For more information, visit eventleadershipinstitute.com.